Well, thank you for coming tonight, everybody. And if you can't see, scoot closer, backsliders. Um, we have Delta is actually Skyping in with us, so our foster family's up in Delta. Everybody say hello. And then with us tonight we have Kathy and Lisa. So Lisa is special education coordinator, and then Kathy is the preventative services with the school district. So I didn't really give them a whole lot. I just said, come talk about school and being foster parents and what challenges that may look like. So IEP, teenagers and their rights with schools. So if you guys have a spiel, and then we'll just take some questions.
Okay, so I'll start because I have a very little spiel, and that is, I don't work with, the request of us was that we come talk about special education, and I don't have a special education background. The reason I'm connected to foster youth is I've been the child welfare education liaison for the school district to the state, and that is in response to the Fostering Connections Act. And young people in foster care have some specific rights under the law to enrollment, to records, to transportation, things like that. So that's the piece that I can speak to if there are questions around that. But I understood that primarily your interest was in hearing about special education. So Lisa agreed to come with me to be able to answer your questions around special education.
Thank you. Okay, Lisa.
Yeah,
floor is yours.
and I don't necessarily have a spiel. I was just hoping to answer questions.
Okay.
So,
All right. Where do we start? Renee?
I don't have anything.
So how do we know if a kid needs to be tested? What are some, like a
So-
foster kid comes in, we don't know a whole lot about them, we don't have a lot of history, where do we start?
so if you feel like a student might have a disability, like a kid you receive might have a disability, then there's a process at each school. It's a MTSS, multi-tier system of support, and there's a team at the school. So generally, just talking to the school psychologist at each school would connect you with the team that you needed to be with.
Okay.
And
How
if
about-
there's,
How about the flip side of that? If you think a kid might be gifted,
Absolutely.
there's also, at the elementary level, there's a gifted and talented teacher at every school, so you can access them that way. Middle and high school, I'm not sure about, yeah, there's a gifted and talented teacher at the middle schools as well. High schools do not have a gifted and talented coordinator per se. They have higher level classes, different
But
different offerings of classes, but there is a district coordinator
Yeah.
that you can be in contact with to help you through that process.
And she has done some assessment this year with a high school, a ninth grader, and actually found that he was twice exceptional. So he was gifted and had a disability. So
Wow.
And oftentimes, if you're getting a youth in, that is, you believe that at some point there's been an IEP, but it has not followed that student. Our records department, there's a whole department that deals with special education records, and they can help you track that down to make sure that you get that information as well.
So can you talk about a little bit about, because when you think of, when I used to, years and years ago, think about special ed, I thought about just, an IEP, that it was just, that it was solely on academic portion, but also that we have speech therapists, occupational therapists that do go to those schools, and that all about the auditory testing that can be done down at the Hawthorne building.
So, yes, there's related services, which is what you're talking about, the speech therapist and the OT, PT, and then there's also Child Find that helps with younger kids that are preschool age, and those will help identify kids if they have a disability. And then there's just different disability categories, specific learning disability. So I mean, there's a lot of different ways to identify a kid if the kid has a need.
But the auditory stuff that can happen clear through high school,
Yes.
that you can go down if there's auditory memory, auditory processing, any of the type of those concerns that the kid just is in the classroom and working hard but can't seem to stay up on things. Sometimes it is that they're hearing, but they're not really hearing. You know, they hear fine, but it doesn't process. And
And so
so,
there's several assessments that the school psychologist can do within the building to help with that.
and with a speech therapist and occupational therapist, is that just based like from the high schools down, like the clusters? Or is, because you don't have one in each school and they share how many schools or?
SLPs, they're assigned to maybe 2 or 3 buildings, it depends. So, elementaries, they're mostly assigned to like an elementary and a preschool that's attached. So, I mean, it varies across the district as to how many assignments each SLP has. And then OTPTs are kind of assigned across the district according to need.
And when you identified a need for a child in suspected disability, there's a multifaceted assessment. You're not just gonna say, well, they're struggling in math, so we're only gonna have this small math-based assessment around that. There's a battery that the professionals, the school psychologist will look at to make sure that we're addressing the whole child.
So has anybody got that little blue booklet from the school district that says
The parental rights.
our rights? Has anybody read that book?
What is that book?
Well, the good part about the book, which took me a while to learn, is that as a foster parent, you can appeal their decision. So you can, you know, if they do an evaluation and they come up with that they're not far enough behind, or the issues don't meet the correct criteria, but sometimes you think as a foster parent, we don't have the right to appeal that, but we do. And that's in that little blue booklet, that you can go through and appeal, and it doesn't necessarily make the school district very happy with you, but
No, but ultimately, it's a IEP team decision with any services that a student receives. So,
And, you know, gone are the days that a child is identified and they get a full battery assessment, psychological, IQ, all those things that they look for a discrepancy. They called it the discrepancy model. Performance here, ability here, other way around. You know, ability, performance, discrepancy. They found nationwide, actually, that the wrong children were being identified into special education through that model, and we were missing lots of children who were truly disabled. So we now, by law, by state and federal law, use a response to intervention method. And that is sometimes very frustrating for parents because it takes some time. But when you think about philosophically, the reason for that is we want to be able to identify that this is something that's organic to the child. It's not a lack of quality first instruction, access to good instruction, access to intervention, how they learn in their mode. We want to make sure that this is truly a learning disability so we can address it properly. So sometimes there's real frustration around the time it takes because you want to intervene with a child, see how they respond. If they're not responding, we stop that intervention and try again. Because ultimately, whether we find a child disabled through the RTI process or not, we still have to know what works for them so we can continue to move them forward. So that's why we use the response intervention model. Again, it's a federal and state mandate for us, so it's not optional just to say, I want my kid to have this battery assessment and then make a decision. We can use that as pieces of a body of evidence, but we can no longer solely use that for identification of learning disability. And those are the learning disabilities, by the way. Hard disabilities, physical disabilities, those kinds of things don't have to go through those processes.
So Delta's question was, how long does it take to be tested? Is a hard question to
It is.
answer, as you just kind of addressed.
It is.
Depends on.
Because it depends on specifically what intervention they're using. You know, you have to intervene with fidelity according to the intervention in the model. So if it's a 6-week intervention, we may have to go 6 weeks, maybe
before you do the
not.
next.
It's a 12-week intervention, so.
Okay.
so what, but you don't usually do, write IEPs before 3rd grade for the most part, or are you doing some younger now?
yeah,
Oh, sure.
yeah.
Sure.
And how late in intervention will you write an IEP?
Right up until they leave our
Until they
system.
graduate, yeah.
I have a question. So I have a kid on the IP, and he had a annual review coming up, and there was some discrepancy, and I was confused about, so the letter, obviously, foster parents don't have educational rights. parents retain those educational rights until their rights are terminated or whatever. So for a little while, I was told I can't come to the IEP meeting, but then the paper that was given like to the caseworker said, bring anyone with you to this meeting who you would feel would support you. So was it just like a misunderstanding, or would foster parents be able to be that person that someone could bring?
A foster parent could go to a meeting, yes.
So we shouldn't be.
Do you have to reach out to the bio parents and just give them that option of coming, or how does that work legally?
I don't think you need to give them the option, but you do need to be prepared. It could be a kind of a tense situation. So I would certainly talk to the team about, is everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
See, they told me the bio parent had to be invited, and then.
They have to be
They
invited.
have to be invited.
But they don't need their permission to invite you as well.
Yeah.
See, I was told different. They had to get bio mom to sign off for me to come, which is why I was confused. I'm on the teaching side, and I've never had that trouble, so then I was
No.
confused with the foster parent. So that's not maybe necessarily.
Yeah, they had to invite bio mom because she still has education. She has educational rights.
But she didn't have to sign that I could come.
She may have just not been comfortable with it. I mean, who knows?
Some
It could've-
Fine, but there was
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
gray area where they're like, you can't come, and I'm like,
No.
Generally, you know, if you have someone come into the meeting that's not on the notice of meeting, you ask the parent if it's okay if this person comes, and that's just a
so
general.
I had a notice of meeting, I guess. I was just checking, should I be allowed to go in the future? That should be yes.
What did the caseworker say?
The caseworker says she'll come. I mean, they had to see the
The
coming.
caseworker saying that.
It's a good question, though.
She wasn't sure. There was kind of a gray area that she hadn't experienced. So that's why I was asking.
It's kind of weird. I mean, I'm sorry.
Thankfully, the rest of you are going, wow, that's weird, which means you haven't
Yeah.
experienced
That is
this,
good.
which is good.
Because I've always been to go,
Yeah.
always.
I've always gone, and I've always been the one that signed the papers to approve the IEP and everything, so.
And I had to do that. But
Well, I mean, I go, but I don't sign those papers, but the caseworkers do, or, you know.
You should sign as a participant of the meeting.
Well, I mean, like, I can't, because I have teams, I can't say, hey, you know, I mean, if you let the teams go and, go to this school, that school, I mean, they have to stand and get permission from the caseworker where they go, you know?
Yeah. So then there's the person who has the educational rights who signs because they're the ones that have more input into the placement decisions. But you could sign as just a meeting participant. So,
Yeah, I've just gone to pick up papers, you know, nobody's doing.
yeah. No.
Every case is different.
Yes, very.
Could you explain the difference between 501 and IEP?
504?
504.
Sure.
I kind of
CPO.
understand, but not really,
Yeah.
so.
So, an IEP is more restrictive. There are 13 categorical eligibilities for a child to be considered disabled under IDEA. Section 504 says any child with a mental or physical impairment that substantially limits their ability to achieve or walk, see, hear, breathe. It's about a major life activity. And so 504 is a much less restrictive. There is no assessment for 504. What happens when you make a 504 referral is they will really collect what data they already have: attendance, discipline, classroom level work assessment, state assessments, all those things. And they will look to see, as well as any documentation that you or whomever's referring brings to say, we have a child with ADHD, or we suspect ADHD, or those kinds of things. So they will look at what's called the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, 5th edition, and that's what clinicians and physicians use for diagnoses. And you'll look at presenting difficulties based on a diagnosis versus performance, and you look if you can tell that a condition, a disability, a disorder is significantly limiting a child's ability to achieve, then they qualify for a 504 plan. 504 plans are primarily and almost exclusively what happens with a classroom teacher in the classroom. It's not, into a resource program, a teacher pulling a student out and making accommodations that way.
So I have 5 kids that are all on IEPs. IEPs are the best
You know, it's interesting because it really depends on the child and their needs. There are lots of kids who do just fine on so we have 504 plans, we have RTI plans, and we have special education plans. Really, a 504 is the least restrictive because it's going to be delivered by the classroom teacher within the classroom setting. An RTI plan, a child may have additional small group, additional specialized instruction. And then an IEP, if it's a learning disability, they have the right to specialized instruction. So it really depends on your level of need. If a child doesn't need specialized instruction, you don't want that label. You want something less restrictive and more integrated within the system.
The other part is the 504 follows them through college as well. So once it's written, it can follow them through. The problem for the school district, it doesn't give them any more funding.
Well, but
So-
both of them do, except with an IEP and with a 504, the child has to advocate
Yeah, at the
for
school.
themselves at the college level
Right.
for both plans. So, but in terms of the funding, yes and no. It's an issue, yes and no. The fact of the matter is the classroom teacher is responsible for that, so you're not bringing in additional people for support for that child. So we just want to make sure that we're matching level of intervention to a child's need and not over or under supporting.
The problem with the 504 is most of the time, the teachers, those great teachers are gonna do all that work anyway. But there are some cases, you know, I've had 504s on several children, and a teacher's either gonna do it or they're not. And some teachers just are not going to comply with with what's in the 504. And it's unfortunate, but it's either the makeup of the class, or they don't buy into it, or it's just whatever. But I've had them for PTSD diagnosis, but all the diabetics, District 51 mandates that they're on 504s now. But I've had teachers.
No?
They can be
No,
on healthcare.
we don't.
But-
So we offer a 504 to all parents of diabetic students. They can continue just on a healthcare plan if that's their interest, but they are offered a 504 plan. They automatically qualify by law
Right.
for a 504 plan, but some parents would prefer they're managed well on a healthcare plan, and so they choose to keep that. But
They told me the last one that we had to do it. But
there, we can't mandate any services.
the rough part
Anyway.
is that we had teachers that did not follow. the
Right, and
medical plan.
I'm glad that you repeated that again, because I would hope that that would be an immediate visit with the principal, because
Has
they are
been.
legally liable the minute they know that there's a 504 plan. They are legally liable for everything that's on that 504 plan. They also, though, have the right to say, I cannot do this accommodation, and ask that the team come back together and they rewrite accommodations. They can't choose not to accommodate, but a teacher has the right to choose how they accommodate a certain need.
I only had a problem with one school, and it was one group of teachers at one school, and they refused.
Yeah, and that's, just so you know, just so you have information, teachers are personally liable, not, the district isn't liable, the school isn't liable, because we provide annual in-service on Section 504, including all the law and the processes and procedures, and the person in the building lets the teachers know of their liability as well. So if a teacher is willfully refusing and not asking to come forward and rewrite the plan, they are personally liable. And there's case law of massive lawsuits against individuals in school systems.
There was one school, one group of teachers, everybody else has been spectacular.
This 504 is a federal.
It is, correct. It is an access law. It's a civil rights statute and governed by the Office of Civil Rights.
So would you say that maybe a 504, for some kids who don't have a big enough discrepancy, that is an alternative that is maybe, I don't wanna say easier to get a designation, but would you kind of say? So if there's a kid that you're noticing a discrepancy maybe at home, and then the RTI team is going through their process and they're seeing a little different, or maybe it's a behavior that's harder to track, then could you kind of ask the team to go on a 504 route?
So you have to have a diagnosed disability.
So like
Or-
ADHD, for example. I was
Correct,
thinking of that
correct.
or something.
If you have already a diagnosed disability, what the team will do is look at what the issues are and match them up with what the characteristics of an ADHD diagnosis. So, let me give you an example of, it has to be, the behaviors, the struggles have to be a direct manifestation of the disability, because through a 504 plan, a child may have ADHD and have characteristics of ADHD that need to be supported through a plan, but have all these other behaviors that have nothing to do with the disability. By law under 504, you can't be building a plan for this, only what is a direct manifestation of the disability. So you may have a kiddo with ADHD that needs, some help with impulse control, needs some help with organization, needs 2 sets of books, one at home and one at school, needs a sign-in from the teacher daily to make sure they have their homework written down, that kind of thing. That would be the kind of thing that was supported under a 504 plan. But if there were other behavioral needs that are not indicated with ADHD, that would not be something that would be covered there. That would either be something that you'd be looking at an evaluation or through the RTI process.
But that 504 can still allow like for accommodations of testing, right?
Yeah.
Is that-
Absolutely, and you can have a 504 and an RTI plan at the same time. Yeah, you wouldn't have an IEP in a 504 plan, although we have had a couple instances where the IEP was strictly like speech language or something like that, that we've done a 504 for like ADHD or something like that, or a student who has diabetes, we might have a 504 plan for that and an IEP for a learning disability. But most of the time, because the IEP is so much more, it's a more restrictive identification, all of the 504 needs would be taken care of within the IEP.
Do you, does it ever naturally occur that a child would then kind of step down from an IEP to a 504? Like they would encourage you to maybe
So,
remove some of the
That's a great
restrictions?
question. It depends on why they're being removed from their IEP. If they believe that the child is no longer disabled, then they're not going to qualify for a 504 either, because you have to have a disability.
If it was something like fetal alcohol, a fetal alcohol diagnosis, but that what they started with was pretty extensive with all of their needs, but as they progress, you're noticing, okay, we've tackled a number of these things, doesn't seem like it's quite as overwhelming, would they encourage maybe to step down to a 504?
If the child no longer needs a specialized instruction, then a 504 could be a
Like
possibility.
they don't need to leave the classroom in order to,
It's not an automatic, but it certainly is a red flag, and it certainly is something you could say, I'd like to see if he qualifies for a 504 plan at this point. Anybody can make a referral for a 504. If you come in with a diagnosis in hand, it makes everything a whole lot easier, as opposed to wanting the school to make a diagnosis. And legally, the school can make a diagnosis, but we really don't like to, because that's not our business, and then it becomes strictly an educational, looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck. We think, as an institution, it might be a duck.
Could you go to the exact correct question? Could they, at their annual review for the IEP, could you ask for goals to align more to what the, like maybe the disability, if it's not gone, but you could have some input to help those goals gear more towards what the kid needs now versus the year before, right? Wouldn't that be
That's-
what you could do?
And that's how the goals should be written. They should be written to the student's needs and should be written for, for a year. So within that year, the student should be able to reach that goal.
But again, a 504 plan is strictly intervention.
No, I was talking from the IEP,
Okay.
instead of stepping down.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So one of the 504s that we wrote for an older kid who was struggling but didn't qualify for the IEP, we used the PTSD diagnosis for her, and it just really helped her be more successful with the accommodations. And it was very specifically written that teacher, she got a little bit more time doing homework, a little bit shorter assignments, similar to an IEP, but it was just really, really helped, the teacher, because the teachers really liked the kid and the teachers were working really hard, but it validated the things they wanted to do. So it was interesting when we were writing it, the teachers, you know, we picked the teachers who came from the classroom and they were like, well, we're already trying to do this for her, can you give me, the 504 kind of like gave them permission to help her be more successful. And that was through a high school program, and I mean, she graduated. I mean, and she probably would not have if we wouldn't have,
Had those accommodations.
yeah. And I was, PTSD is something a lot of our kids struggle with, but it wasn't something I knew that we could use for that, but it was very successful.
Anybody else?
I have a question. Would an IEP show as a bad mark with applying for colleges or things
No.
like that?
No.
Nope.
Nope, because it's not on transcript, it's not on anything. It's the student's responsibility once they get admitted into that college to go and advocate for their accommodations that they need.
How would you explain to a 17-year-old, 18-year-old how they can advocate?
We encourage, like if it's Mesa, we even connect them with the person on campus that helps with the accommodations through the school.
So you have a contact or
Yeah.
something else.
And there's always a person at every
Every school.
school that's their responsibility to help kids with kind of exceptional needs, whether it's the giftedness or the, you know, whatever the accommodation they need. And that's always, you know, a case manager in the special education department could help a parent find who that person is at the college and help them make that connection. But yeah, in terms of
Ultimately, yeah.
what a college would see on paper, they won't see an IEP. The child brings that with them.
But how do you convince that 17-year-old to ask for help in college? I mean, it's a pride thing, probably.
Well, and you can't guarantee they will, but you know, throughout the high school, you're encouraging them to advocate for themselves, and so you're giving them those strategies so that they can. But ultimately, it's their responsibility once they walk through those doors to actually do it.
I'm curious about Child Find. Like, I've never used it, but like what the ages are for that and how that carries over into elementary school.
So actually, the child find obligation is K-12. And,
Oh,
or
okay.
actually, birth to 21.
I guess it's always been
Yeah.
presented as like
Well,
popular.
our
Yeah.
child find it primarily serves our preschool age kids, but the child find obligation is written in both section 504 and the idea that says that if we suspect a disability, we must evaluate,
Okay.
whatever evaluation means. So I think probably the child find that you're talking about is our, what is it, part C of IDA that, is it part C? Deals with birth to 5 prior to school age years, and that's all housed out of the Hawthorne building.
Okay.
And they have a whole set of criteria and I don't know it.
So okay, we can go at any time. Like if the child's not talking at 2. or-
Absolutely.
Then we just call them and ask for an appointment.
Exactly.
Yep, Kim Self is
And
the,
that just kind of carries into preschool and
Yep.
elementary school.
Yep.
What
Yep.
they come up with.
Yep.
Okay.
It
Yep.
does help if you have a pediatrician on board.
Yeah.
For sure.
It kind of makes it a little easier to just.
Okay.
But you can always just call and say, I'm concerned about a 2-year-old who's not, you know, speaking, and they can let you know what routes to follow.
Okay.
and Kim Self is the child find coordinator.
Okay.
That's good clarification. I always thought it was kind of before school age.
Me too.
Well, in our community, again, it's the difference between in the law when it says we have a child find obligation versus what we call our 0 to 5, which we call it child find. So
Okay.
it's just, it's the same and different.
I don't need this, but I am curious also. Does the district do any special programs during the summer to help with learning? Like that's carried past the school year?
So if you have a child with a significant disability that has written into their IEP extended year services, they automatically qualify for summer support. But then in terms of just generalized general education summer school, schools do that. We no longer have a district summer school like we used to.
Oh, okay. So you would have to, if they have one of these things you're talking about, like the IEP, then you would have to request this summer?
No, if it's written into their IEP, they get it
Oh, okay.
regardless.
And then what is that like? It's like they go to school still on a regular basis?
It's like 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, and I don't know where the elementary is. I know middle school is going to be up at the Redlands, and the high school is going to be up at the Redlands. But I don't know. I've not heard where the elementary extended school year is going to be this summer.
And that's generally for kids with profound
Where they
needs
where they
that
show
they're gonna
where they show
decline so
regression. They
much
show
over the-
regression like after Christmas break, or they show regression spring break, and it takes time to recoup those skills that they've lost. Those are
Okay.
generally the kids that qualify for extended school year.
Okay.
So if they marked on the IEP that they wouldn't necessarily qualify, but they have those things that you're talking about, is that something you can ask to reevaluate or after the
Absolutely.
IEP or the?
Absolutely. So
If you suspect that somebody has dyslexia, how could you get help for that?
dyslexia is just a part of a reading disability, so it would show up as a reading disability. So whenever the student was assessed, that's what they would see. It would be a reading disability, and they would receive those services for that.
Okay, well, I think we can wrap things up. They have to go, not interview, what are you meeting?
No, meet and greet with the new
For a-
superintendent candidates.
So they have very important things to do on our
Yeah.
behalf. So
Yeah.
thank you guys.
Yeah. Feel free to email me if more questions come up.